Right, welcome to this episode of the State of Mirrorless, our series of video interviews where we meet every couple of weeks. We meet a photographer or an industry expert to talk with us about mirrorless cameras, their choice of gear, their photography, and anything that might be interesting. And today it is my pleasure to introduce Brian Matiash. Brian is a photographer. I think he's not a full-time pro. His main job is still related to photography because he's the let me know if I say that correctly. You're the global evangelist for Google Photos. Is that right, Brian?
Yep, that's correct.
So, and you're based in Portland, Oregon.
Yes, yeah. I was based in Mountain View for a little over a year, which is where Google headquarters is, and then we lived in Portland before we moved down there, and we just missed it a lot, so we relocated back.
And tonight with us, or today, depending on your time zone, it's night here already. We'll have Matteo Gasquea, my co-host, who will take turns with
Hello.
me asking Brian questions. Hi, Matteo.
Thanks.
So Brian, do you want to tell us a bit about your photography? How did it all start? And what's your favorite genre? When do you take photos, and what do you like about taking photos?
Sure. I started, with photography, where I actually started caring about it when I was my first year in university, and that was in 1996. And as you know, in the beginning, like a lot of things for me at least, it just was it was a hobby, very much a hobby. And my university, I went to Syracuse University in central New York, and the campus was filled with tons of beautiful architecture. And so that's kind of when I was, first getting into photography, that was what I was surrounded with. I started taking it much more seriously probably around 2004, 2005, and really kind of like getting into it, almost, like an enthusiast. And then in 2009 or 2010, I got hired by On One Software, which they make plugins for Photoshop and Lightroom to do all their content and education, because I was really getting excited about photography on the internet with my blog, and then as social media started to become more of a thing with that. And then I was on One for about 3 years when an opportunity at Google opened up, and I joined to essentially Google. At the time, Google Plus had a huge following of photographers using the platform, and so that it's important to kind of navigate and understand what that particular industry wants and needs and likes and doesn't like. And because I had strong connections with a lot of people in the industry, it was just a good fit. That's kind of my professional side. Personally, you asked what kind of photography I like. It very much has been kind of an evolution in a way, I guess. I started with architecture. I love architecture photography, and then through architecture, it evolved into like urbex and abandoned photography, where you have structures that are just forgotten and totally, falling apart. And in Europe especially, they're in Germany and parts of Italy and in France, there are just some beautiful buildings that are just left to the elements. So that was really important. And then once I moved to Portland from the Northeast U.S. A year after I started at On One. So I worked my first year at On One remotely, and then I moved out here. And here, as you go, it's funny because the United States started more on the East Coast, especially the Northeast with Boston and New York. So that's where the older architecture and there has been more opportunity for buildings to get forgotten. As you move to the West, and the U.S. expanded, the architecture is newer and there's not as much. Like in Portland, there just isn't that much abandoned stuff. What there is a ton of is beautiful nature and landscape and waterfalls and like streams and rapids and mountains and coasts. And that didn't have that as much. I mean, I'm from Brooklyn, New York, in New York City, so I remember seeing my very first waterfall when I came here on my first visit. So, and that wasn't too long ago, and I'm 36 now. So I went most of my life without seeing any of that real nature. So to answer your question, right now for me it's nature, like travel and nature. And what's omitted, and what I appreciate but I have no desire, is like our people, portraits, events. I love it. I can appreciate it from an aesthetic perspective. When a photographer captures a beautiful moment of a person, but I don't translate, I don't connect in that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's understandable. So you mentioned that you now work at Google. Can you tell us a bit about what your role is there? What does it mean to be a Google photo evangelist in practice?
It depends on which day or which week you ask me. It depends on who's asking me too. So an evangelist is basically someone who. So you think of a marketing team. Marketing team takes a product, for instance, or a service, and they package it in with a message that gets broadcast far and wide. Here is the new Sony camera. Well, Sony's marketing team will come together and put, graphics and messaging and, advertisements. So that's more on a product level. However, with photos especially, there's also kind of a human level, I guess, if that's a good way to compare it. But like, you have to understand and relate and get feedback from people. And photography in particular, it's not like you have to understand photography. You have to understand what people want. You have to talk the talk. You have to. If I go talk to you and I, don't know really anything about photography or social, like talking to you about what is it about sharing your photos that you don't like with today's solutions, I need to understand, when you give me an answer that I can take it and bring it back to engineers, or bring it back to product managers, and find a way to make it better. So my primary charter has focused with the enthusiast and the amateurs, basically anyone who really likes photography. Whereas there's another component that I don't really involve myself much with, and that's the general broad consumer. And this is essentially someone who takes their mobile phone out and just takes a photo. It's not, taking the photo primarily to share it with their parents or their grandparents or whatever. But the thought of like taking the nice, putting thought into a composition, and maybe even post-processing, that doesn't really apply to that group. So that group I don't really deal with or work with. I work with people who really genuinely care about photography, from the user to the influencer. And that's another part. Like, there are influencers, there are other photographers in the industry who I make it a point to have relationships with, so that when I collect feedback, it's not lopsided. It's not just the users, but it's also, hey, these influencers have loud megaphones. Like, when they talk, lots of people listen. We need to make sure that we're taking their feedback into account as well.
I see. For one like me that has been using the Google Plus and Google Photos for some years, it's sort of a no-brainer because I really like it. But for people who never used or don't have a good perception of what it means to use Google Photos, why is it so good? Why is it so great? What's so great about Google Photos?
So the way I approach that is, I see it as there are two primary products or camps. When I think of Google Photos, I think of the immediate value add is the auto backup. You know, anything that you take with your mobile phone, or you know, a lot of times what I do is I'll be shooting with my Sony, and when there's some downtime, like we stopped to get lunch or we were just resting, I'll browse through the photos on my camera and I'll transfer them over to my phone over Wi-Fi. And assuming I have a signal, it'll automatically start backing up to Drive. So that's a huge advantage. Also, and here's an important thing to understand. You're saying Google Photos, which is actually a product. That is auto backup, that's auto enhance, auto awesome, that kind of stuff. There's also Google Plus Photos. So Google Plus Photos is the brand, is kind of like an entity on Google Plus that cares all about photography. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
so for especially the general consumer who doesn't really understand what it means to have a backup solution for their photos. You know, I come home, I have two Drobos sitting here. I have an offsite backup. Like, these are things that a very specific type of user cares about. But there are so many more of the general consumers who they just want to take photos. They want to take photos. They want to know that if their phone gets lost or submerged in water, that the photos aren't gone forever. And so that's a big value add. So that's kind of, I would say, one of the, how I would answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So, coming back to you and your photography, you recently, or more or less recently, started using Sony mirrorless cameras and specifically the A7 series, right?
Correct.
So can you tell us a bit about the story of you switching from what you were using before? I think it was Canon equipment.
Yeah.
You decided to go to Sony. What were the reasons? What you find so great about mirrorless cameras, or Sony in particular, that you were not getting with your previous choice of equipment?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely. So I mean, you remember when I was starting off and I said how at college, that's when I really started with my photography in '96. And so my very first camera was a Canon AE1, just a film-based SLR camera, wonderful camera. And over the course of this time, pretty much only shot Canon. My very first digital camera was the first Rebel, the 300D, I think was the model. And so that was what I used. I had the 40D, the 5D, the 5D2, the 5D3, and the lenses that I needed. And what was like, I used, I dabbled with the Sony NEX7, which is a crop sensor mirrorless camera. And I liked it, but it just didn't still fit for me. How when you try something, you're like, it's almost there, but it's not quite there for me, for my needs. So that didn't work. When I started really taking Sony seriously was when they released the RX1. The RX1 and I think it's the QX10 and the QX100. The RX1 was the first full-frame mirrorless pocket camera. It was, I think it was a 35mm integrated lens. So it wasn't a lens system, but it was a full-frame little camera that I'd never seen before. And then the QX series were these like Bluetooth phone lenses that you attach to your phone. So you pair the phone up with the lens, and instead of having to rely on the camera system, you rely on the lens. My point is, all of a sudden I was like, wow, Sony's really, whether it's successful or not, they're really taking kind of risks. Like, They're trying to be movers and shakers, and I respect that a lot, because nothing from Canon came out. And so, I mean, they released their EOS M, which was just, in my opinion, totally forgettable. But I was like, okay, this is interesting. And so that's where Sony started really getting my radar. When they announced the A7, I was like, okay, interesting. Fine. Okay. The reason why I never got an RX1 was because I never wanted to be tied to one lens. I'm not, that's, you know, I think anyone who shoots SLR can appreciate that. So when they announced the A7, I said, okay, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to just use the camera, and I'm going to buy a Metabones adapter and use all my Canon glass. And I'll tell you something. I really fell in love with it. After about 6 months of using it, and I would like post online like impressions and stuff and thoughts around it. And then finally it came to a point where I wanted to have an integrated lens system with my camera, and you know, so I could take advantage of autofocus, the native autofocus, which I was losing when I was using an adapter. And so I decided, you know what, I want to invest in Sony, and I started selling off my Canon gear, and as I would sell Canon gear, I would buy the Sony stuff. So right now, for me, the benefits of mirrorless are the fact that it's so light, it's ridiculously light, and I'm not trading up anything. Like, I'm super lucky. Like, I'm not gonna deny it. Like, I have an A7. I have two A7s. One I converted to infrared. I have an A7R and I have an A7S, and each one has a specific use case in my photography, and each one is fantastic.
Would you say that the choice of Sony, in particular, instead of, say, Micro Four Thirds system or Fuji, was also due to the fact that Sony is offering full-frame cameras?
Absolutely.
Do you think that's important?
Okay, it's important for me, because I typically shoot wider. And for things like having a higher frame rate, stuff like that is not as critical for me because I'm almost always on a tripod. So it's one thing to have, say, a 24 megapixel or a 36 megapixel sensor in a crop sensor. You know, that's just, it's like, even having a 24 megapixel like the A6000, that's a lot of megapixels. So for me, being able to have a full frame sensor that has the right amount of megapixels, that especially for my type of work, the landscape and the travel, there are times when I have to crop, sometimes more aggressively than others, and it's just, for me, having a full frame sensor makes more sense. If I were, say, maybe a sports photographer or, you know, shooting fast action stuff, yeah, having a crop sensor, like, you know, would be fine. Like, that's why you see a lot of sports photographers with their 1D series cameras that have the crop sensor. And also they have a crazy frame rate.
Yeah. Mathieu, do you have any?
Well, it's I think it's interesting. I mean, the Sony system is certainly the one that is trying to innovate the most. I mean, the amount of products that Sony released in the past 1 year and a half is crazy. I mean, from the QX lenses for the smartphone to full-frame cameras. Now they announced the new A7, which has 5-axis stabilization, which is one of the best features of Olympus cameras. And so, I mean, they really try to shake the market in any way. And I think that's interesting. I'm interested to see how far they will go. I mean, of course, there are a lot of rumors. So sometimes they are right, sometimes they are wrong. But you can really see with the products that are already on the market that Sony is really trying to, I think, from one side, they try to experiment, and probably they prefer to release the camera in the market and see how it goes instead of taking a lot of years studying the market and decide if to release it or not. They just have the technology, they put it in a camera and they release it and they see how it works. So that's interesting from one end. On another hand, it's true that there are a lot of cameras out there today, so sometimes user can be also a little bit confused about which one to buy, which one is the best suited for their needs. But I think we are in an evolving, the market is evolving. I think mirrorless cameras are now becoming serious, and so we are in an evolving situation. So there are a lot of stuff going on. Every brand's trying to push their own technology, and I think Sony has the advantage of being one of the biggest sensor producer.
Exactly.
A lot of other brands, so that's of course a big advantage. They have a lot of technology. They have the Minolta heritage, and they seem to want to invest a lot. So I mean, if I'm correct, you're also part of the Artisan program, which is an interesting program from Sony that is run mainly in the US, and so they started now to build professional support for photographers. They started in Europe. I think they started in the US as well.
Yes.
They announced it recently. So they really want to cover everything from every aspect, both for professional and enthusiasts. That's something very important. Actually, professional support, I think, is one of the most interesting aspects that was announced at Phototina, because that shows that there's a big program behind. It's not just about releasing cameras and competing for megapixels and under technical aspect, but there's a real program behind that want to take that cares about customers, and that so if they're trying to build a community as well and not just cameras, I think that potentially it can become one of the most interesting systems in a few years.
Yeah, I agree. The fact that you brought up a good point in terms of a lot of times, when as they were releasing the A7s, it's always like, okay, does it have in-body stabilization? Because you really do have to answer like to Olympus on that. And this, I mean, not only in-body stabilization, but with any third-party lens, like it's really, really ingenious. And you kind of hit it on the head, Matthew, in terms of the willingness to innovate. And by innovate, that means like take real risks. They did make. I am part of the Artisans program, but there are a few things that's really important to me to be clear. Is that I was added to the Artisans program well after I invested in the A7 technology. It was just a really kind of natural process where Sony reached out and expressed interest in that, but it wasn't where like, hey, we want to make you an artist and here a bunch of Sony stuff, and that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, it was just probably just me here. I'm having some. You're coming through a bit garbled, but I hope it's just my connection here, and the recording is going to be fine. So, yeah, what I wanted to talk about now is, let me see if I can share my screen here. Just a second. Where was that here? Is this little thing here, which is, Brian, your latest book, Moving to Mirrorless,
Yep.
which I got and I read, and it's a very good read, and it contains a lot of really good, wonderful images. So even if people are not specifically interested in mirrorless technology, especially you spend a lot of time and pages about your specific choice of cameras and lenses. Even if people are not interested in in getting a Sony camera or lens, just the images are worth the price of the book, which is, I think, is free. So can you tell us a bit about your book? Why did you decide to write it? What it's about? And especially, how can people get a copy?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for the kind words. This is my first ebook. It's the first time I wrote it, I self-published it, I laid it out myself. So it was a really wonderful learning experience, and the response has been really positive. So the reason why I wrote the book, originally it was actually going to be a blog post, because when I started with the A7 series, and especially when I started selling off my Canon gear and went on to the Sony lenses, I would post online, and I got tons of questions, which is great. People are. I think it just shows that people are honestly thinking about making similar moves. And so I was about to write a blog post on it when I was like, there was just too much to cover. And I thought, if I do a really kind of long blog post, no one will ever read it, because people, when they're on a website, they, when you're browsing the web, you have a limited attention span, you have a limited amount of time, you have notifications coming every day. So I thought about let me just collect my thoughts. Let me collect all of my, my favorite images that I took with Sony cameras and Sony lenses, and I'll put a book together. And I'm really lucky because my wife, her name is Nicole Young. She's published a bunch of her own ebooks, and so she helped me a lot in terms of like best practices with how to lay out a book. So she was a huge inspiration for this. And so when I thought about it, I'm like, well, listen, this is kind of the value here is for everyone, and it wasn't something I felt compelled to put a price on. What I wanted to do was try to grow my newsletter list. And so I thought, okay, what I'll do is I will give it away for free, no questions asked. You sign up for my newsletter, and then when you confirm or double opt in to the newsletter, you'll get a URL to download the book, and you can load it on your tablet or your phone or your computer and read it at your own leisure. And so, it kind of, what I tried to do was go through the questions that people asked and answer them in kind of a easy to read way. I didn't want to spend too much time writing about stuff. But what I did want to do was, as you kind of are showing, is illustrate how each camera that I have and each lens, how it fits into my workflow. Like, there's only one photo in there of a person. Everything else is of landscapes and architecture, as you're showing. So that's why, like, especially one of the lenses I have is the 135 millimeter AMAL lens. That is primarily a portrait lens. I mean, it's a fast lens. It's big and heavy. But for me, with the architecture that I shoot, it's just, really nice. So that's basically what it was. And I remember I got a few people who were, I didn't know, people, they didn't reach out to me. I read comments, and people were like, oh, Sony paid me to do it, and this and that. This started before I became an artisan. This was something I was doing on my own. I didn't get paid a penny for this. Everything, any expense, all the time. I just, worked on the weekends and evenings to do it. And so, of course, once I became an artisan, Sony has been super helpful in helping to promote it. So that's great. But yeah, I just put it together. I mean, no strings attached. You can sign up for the newsletter, get the book, and unsubscribe the next day. I just want, people have questions, and, especially now that I am an artist, and I feel like it's my responsibility to help educate people. I get emails all the time now. people have questions, and I do my best to answer them. So.
Yeah, I think it's really a great gift. By the way, I have a photo of those same trees here myself.
Oh, from Mesa.
I know where this was taken. I have a photo of the same trees.
Yep.
Anyway.
What you didn't see was a few seconds before when I gave an angry look at the two people who were just standing next to it.
Yeah, that place tends to be a bit crowded at times, especially in the early morning.
Oh, sure.
And,
yeah.
It's
that was actually
Matiash in Canyonlands National Park in Utah.
That's correct.
I like the book because there are more photos and there are more photos than words, and the other way the book, the layout. I mean, there are a lot of big photos. I mean, I think it's a book that could look very good printed as well. I don't know if you thought about maybe have a printed limited copies, but I mean, the fact that there are full-size images and it's interesting. I mean, you share your experience, but then there's a lot of photographs that are right there to somehow prove what you're saying. And
I never even first considered it, but I guess I could look into. Yeah, I'll look into it. I didn't think it. If people want it, I guess why should I deny them if they want a printed copy? But you also again touched on a really important thing. Like when you think about it, if we're talking about gear, which is what we're talking about, right? With Mirrorless, there's nothing, no review, there's no comment or blog article that can come close to illustrating what camera lens or camera body can do than just showing a photo. And so, again, Matthew, totally good. Like, I didn't want to spend too much time making people read through stuff. Like, even like the breaking down the difference between an SLR and a mirrorless. Like, I wanted to keep it quick because I didn't want people to get even more confused or more bored. So it was like four or five chapters of like just some text. The transition chapter, I think, was almost all text because I just wanted to get through it. But then after that, it was a cover, chapter open, profile of the gear, 3 photos. It's done. Every photo has the EXIF, so people can see specifically what the settings were. And then actually, if you go to the top, I actually do want to correct something. I feel really badly about this. I can't remember which page it was. It was where I compared right there, I think. Go 52. Can you click on that?
62?
52. No, it's further up. It's the page where I compare the weight of the my Canon and my Sony, and it's actually a good opportunity for me to clarify something. I'm working on a second edition of this for Q1 because you've got the A7 II, you have my A7 that I converted to infrared, and there hopefully will be new lenses. So
yeah, I remember reading that part.
I think that's the page. No, where is it? Now I'm like intent on finding. There, that's it. That's it. So you see here in the second paragraph, it says if you were to compare that to the Canon equivalent lenses that I used to own. So the problem is that I didn't clarify, and this is just, I chalk it up to being, a rookie author. I didn't use a copy editor on this. I did everything myself, basically. But what I meant to say, so when I was comparing the weight of my Sony 70-200 millimeter lens, the Canon equivalent that I owned was the 70-200 2.8 LIS. So you have an extra stop. You also have a IS in there, and so it is significantly lighter. But it's not. If you were to compare the weight of the Sony f4 to the Canon f4, it wouldn't be the same. I just didn't own that lens. So I clarified that, but since we have the book up, I figure on the recording I could say, definitely I apologize. someone accused me of misleading them, and I was like, I had absolutely no intention of misleading anybody. I just was thinking my equivalent lenses that I own, this is what I own, this is what it weighs, and this is how many grams I've saved since moving over. So
Mathieu, you tested the Fuji 5140, which is more or less equivalent, f2.8, which is more or less equivalent to the 70-200 Sony or Canon. How much does that weigh? Do you know?
Sorry, again?
I said, do you know how much the Fuji lens weighs?
I think it's around one kilogram.
Oh.
It's quite not that light. Yeah, it's almost the same. I think it's very similar to the weight of the 70-200 from Sony or from Canon. Lately, most brands released professional telephoto lenses for mirrorless cameras. So Sony had the 70-200. Fuji released the 50-140, Olympus released the 40-150, they're all 2.8. The Sony is f4, but it's on full frame. So, and a lot of people are saying, oh, it's not compact anymore, the lenses are bigger, getting bigger, it's like my DSLR kit. But my answer is always the same, you have to look at the system. Because if you take a backpack and pack it with a lot of DSLR gear, like two bodies and different lenses, and then you do the same with an equivalent mirrorless system, of course the second bag will be much lighter than the DSLR bag. So it's always related to the system. And when you design a lens, I guess it's also a question of physics and different elements that you have to combine together. And it doesn't have to be too pricey, but it has to be fast, it has to be weather sealed, it has to be stabilized, how to focus needs to be really fast. So, of course, there have to be some compromise. But again, when you are around an entire day, an entire week for travel with your backpack and DSLR gear in there or mirrorless gear in there, I think at the end of the day, the back can feel different. So so I think it's a good thing that mirrorless systems are getting this kind of lenses as well, because professional needs them, and it just makes each system more complete and more versatile for the needs of everyone.
Yep.
So there's one last question that I would like to ask you, Brian, and that is there, now that you switched to a mirrorless system, is there anything that you miss from your previous system?
Yeah, there are. I think I even wrote about that in the book. There are a few things. The one thing I miss the most, more than anything else, is on the Canon side. They have the I don't know. I think it's universal. The model. It's the GPE2. It's this GPS radio that slides into the hot shoe. It's not a cold shoe. It's an actual hot shoe because it's got contacts. And it writes really a lot of all the relevant GPS metadata onto the image as it's exposed. So there's no guesswork, And for me, it's really important for me I like to know where I was for obvious reasons, like to plot on a map. But also, a lot of times when I'm done with a shoot, and I'll import the photos into Lightroom, I'll go to the map view and I'll look to see, I try not to stay in one place for too long. And if I see that there's a cluster of a bunch of photos in one spot, that just kind of I'm like, okay, well, there's either something really interesting there, or I need to kind of remember to move around more. So I miss that. And I kind of deal with that by, on my iPhone, I installed a GPS app called, I think, GPS Tracks. And it's pretty straightforward. You hit start when you start your trek. And then when you're done, you hit stop. And what's great about it is that it actually writes a GPX file and saves it to Dropbox immediately. So Lightroom supports GPX. So when I'm done, I import the photos, and then I load the track log from Dropbox, and then I assign the GPS coordinates to each photo based. You have to make sure though before you start your shoot, the first thing I do is I look at the time on my watch and I sync it to the time on the camera because it uses time as the key. So that's one thing. The other big thing, and it's not as big of a deal anymore, but especially when I was really big into HDR, you know, the 5D Mark III, when it came out, it allowed for 7 exposure brackets. So I can do 0 and then 3 down and 3 up. And that was great. That at one-stop increments. That gave me all that I needed for a good tone-mapped image. And the A7 and the A7R, much like most every other camera, which I don't understand, limits you to 3 brackets. So you do 0 and then 1 down and 1 up. However, what I found actually right around when I took that photo at Mesa Arch of the Tree, literally right around there, it was with my A7S. For some reason, the A7S has a more refined firmware, and that supports 5 exposure brackets at 1-stop or 2-stop or 3-stop increments, which is good. I'll take it. You know, it's better than 3. And you know, I've brought it up with Sony, the digital imaging engineers, and their product manager too, about can we please get this? It's just it has to be 1 line of code. I mean, it has to, you know, and so those are really the only 2 things. You know, a lot of the things that a lot of other photographers concern themselves with, like frame rate and that kind of stuff, it really doesn't bother me because almost every single time I shoot, my camera goes on a tripod, and I don't shoot rapid stuff. I don't shoot sports. I don't shoot weddings. So and also for the autofocus, like yes, it like the A6000 for instance has this amazing autofocus system, and I'm sure one day we'll see that in an A7 body. But I manual focus almost all the time, you know, between focus peaking and the ability to magnify your focus point and, you know, get fine focus. That's, for me, that's what works. So yeah.
Okay. Mathieu, do you have any other questions? Or?
Well, I just wanted to mention a quick passage of Brian's book, because when I was reading earlier, at a certain point you mentioning when you had to choose the lenses for the new A7 system, you asked one of your colleague Brian Smith to advise us for that, and I like what you said when you said that if there's one thing that I can recommend enough is to try and reach out to photographers. We can provide you with real-world experience with gear. So I mean, get with other photographers and share experience, perhaps maybe on the field together or with some photo work together is something that it's interesting and is always nice to remember. I mean, sometimes we tend to be too much confined on the internet only, and always consider the internet or social networks or every kind of photo community just a start to then continue on the other side, which is the real world side. So I like that passage of the book. And
thanks. Yeah, I mean, that was like a 2.5 hour call. It was a long phone call, and Brian, you know, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer. You know, he is just such a cool guy, and I'm really kind of like honored to consider him a friend. And I remember I sent him a direct message on Twitter, and I was like, hey, do you have a few minutes to chat, because I want to really do this. And yeah, we got on the phone. I asked him, you know, because his needs as a photographer are very different than mine. I mean, he shoots celebrities, he shoots people, he shoots all kinds of events. I shoot waterfalls, and, you know, so we chatted a bunch about it, and not just with him, but also with Vivian Gougois, who's another artisan like I get emails. I've gotten some of my favorite emails that I've gotten so far from people are questions like, you know, should I do the 1635 FE mount or should I just do the 2.8, the alpha, and get the adapter? Like, I love chatting about this stuff. What people, you kind of touched on it, Matthew, like, you get stuck on these reviews that, you know, I said I made it a point, even on the second page of the book. I don't care about MTF charts and like, you know, no lens is perfect. You know, is a solution for everything. The thing that I can't recommend enough is if you have the opportunity, rent the lens, rent a camera. Anytime I would take a major trip past couple of years, I would always rent gear that I didn't have to see if it's something that I needed. Don't forget what people are writing. Like, I mean, it's, of course, like, from an experience perspective, it's helpful, but I can't tell you if the A7S will work for you. I can tell you why I love it, what it does for me, but you know, it's just to me it's common sense. But yeah, it's rather try to find a one-on-one conversation than just read an article that someone wrote. You know, I don't know. That's just my personal opinion.
So should I get the 16-35 for my 7S?
What's on there right now? Oh, the 35?
That's the Loxia 35, yeah.
Oh.
Loxia 35. Well, I'm testing it right now. They're quite interesting lenses. I like it because they are small, very small. They fit the system perfectly. Great light qualities.
Is that kind of rubber focus ring?
No, it's metal. It's metal focus ring. Yeah.
Okay. And what Zeiss lenses just came out?
There are two Loxia lenses right now. That they're manual focus lenses, and so this one is the 35. I also have the 50.
Yeah.
And they're very nice lenses. They're designed especially for the A7 system. So.
I have the 55-1.8, the Zeiss, and I don't own the 35. Because I have the 2470, which for me suffices. But if the 1635 f4 it's a wonderful lens. I got it last week. I had the pre-release model to test. And actually, that photo also that you showed at Mesa Arch, that was with the 1635 because someone wanted me to test the starburst of it. It's a great lens. The only reason why I would recommend the 2.8 is if you need the speed. For me, I don't really shoot wide open. It would help with stars, for sure. But I used it at night at f4, especially with the A7S, which you can crank up the ISO. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to close this interview here. I want to thank you for being with us today. It's been really great, especially for all the people who are looking into the Sony system and might think of switching. So before we close, can you let us know where people can find you online, especially where they can find your book, or if you have any parting thoughts?
Well, first, I really appreciate that you had me on. I think I just changed my lower third banner to have my website, which I should have done to begin with, but that's fine. If you want to just learn more or see my work and stuff, just my website is brianmatiash.com. You will see on the website you can't miss it. There's just a big banner that if you want to get the book, you just sign up for the newsletter and you'll get a copy of it once you confirm. But I really appreciate, Mirrorless is definitely I'd say the future. It just is. At least, you know, the next phase, it'll just get better and better. You know, the mirror box, the prism is clearly not needed. So let's see what these companies can do. And from a Sony side, you know, yeah, I'm totally hooked with them.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Mathieu, do you have any? Where can people find you?
Oh, well, the URL is quite long. It's bestmirrorlesscamerareviews.com. We and we can. They also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Google Plus, Pinterest. We are almost everywhere. So.
All right. So thank you again for coming today, and hope everybody will like this. Cheers. Bye.
All right. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.